An Italian filmmaker is not an Italian filmmaker, to be completely honest, is a Londoner since he was 19. I did my university here. I was a banker for a few years. And I was lucky enough when I was 26 to meet a man called David Putnam, who was about to leave London to make a film in Thailand, of all places, called The Killing Fields. This is 83. It's 31 years ago. And I followed him there, and I found myself a little hotel there, and I got into the crew there. And since then, I worked in the film business out of Britain. And when I finally decided to try to make my own films, I was already a resident of London, and when the idea came to me, I just pursued it out of here. So although I'm very, very, very Italian in my background and my language and the way I dream, etc., I was a Londoner, and it was natural for me to make a film set in England, or quite natural, although the first film I produced independently was set in New York, so it's, and the one after in Ireland, and then all over the world. A friend of friends came to see me in the office and talked to me about a story about a man who was involved in drug dealing and in stripograms. And for some reason, out of that conversation, I had this image of the guys at the end of Riff Raff, the Ken Loach movie, that leave the place they have built in flames and sort of walk down the road and stand in front of a Chippendale poster and say, this is what we're going to do next. And in fact, for a very short period of time, I even imagined I thought about going to Ken Loach and saying, why don't we make a movie about what happens to the Riff Raff guys, and the idea of making. And then I decided that maybe, you know, he would have needed to drink too much alcohol in order to get into the spirit of thing. And I was very lucky. I had a friend of mine who at that time was working at Film 4, a man called Jack Leshner, who had worked with me at Columbia Pictures when I was working at Columbia Pictures a few years earlier. And he said, yes, we'll back the story. We like the story. At this David Aukin time at Film 4. And then I started looking for writers. And funny enough, the first person I talked to is a man called Simon Nye, who had written a wonderful little novel called Men Behaving Badly, which had very little to do with the television series that he made out of that. And he didn't quite understand what I wanted to do. And in fact, what I was interested in was doing a film about miners, because I had lived in Wales for a couple of years, and I was aware of the desperation of some of those villages where the pits were closing, even before the great strike of the 83, 84. And then I was lucky enough for Rod Hall, who was an agent at that time working in London, very brilliant man who had wonderful clients, to send me a script by this unproduced man called Simon Beaufoy. And it was a lovely script called The Tower Man. And it was about a group of men who painted pylons, electricity pylons. And it was a drama, and it wasn't a comedy at all. And it had a wonderful sense of the interaction between men. And I thought he was the right man. And I met with him, and Simon said, I don't know anything about mining, but I know about steel works, because I'm a Yorkshire man, and we had the same problem in Yorkshire, closing Yorkshire steelworks in Yorkshire. And so I said, okay, let's go to Sheffield. And I went to Sheffield with him, and we decided, sure, let's set it in Sheffield. So that's how it all started. Yeah. The most important thing was that we were not making a comedy, or by which I mean is the engine of the film had to be, or was going to be, a comedy, or was to be an amusing situation. But the film was fundamentally a drama, which is why I picked a writer who was out of a script that was a drama and not a comedy. And when I had to pick a director, once we had a script that we were happy with, and I decided to look for a director, I picked somebody who I asked. I didn't pick, sounds like a pretentious word, but I asked Peter Cattanus to join us, and Peter had done a lovely short film for the BBC called Loved Up. And I asked him to do it specifically because of the realism of the film. It was a drama, it was a family drama. There was a wonderful scene an interaction between a daughter and a mother, a drunken mother, I seem to remember. And so basically there was a dramatic scriptwriter, a dramatic director, and the film was supposedly driven by the dramatic issue of being unemployed. It wasn't designed to be a comedy. And the thing that was to me most important, and it is in fact that we stayed in the tone of the film, we stayed in realism. We didn't go into farce and we didn't go into melodrama. We managed to do that. And I think Peter's sensibility was fundamental to that. Although he saw the third draft of the script, and by that time, Simon and I had sort of cleaned up the farcical elements and maybe some of the melodramatic elements. It was Peter's sensibility with the actors on the set that maintained the film in that sort of realist vein or realist tone. I think the moment that that had not happened, if the tone had been forced, if the film had not been set in the real world, then the film would not have been as powerful, as amusing, and also as sad and powerful as it was. There was no confidence ever. I think that any filmmaker will tell you that confidence is something that you can work yourself up to, but deep down inside, you never know whether something is going to work. I just make films that are fundamentally for me, and therefore, whenever there is a decision to be made, it's a decision that is never second-guessing an audience out there, but it's only trying to please my own sensibility. And if it pleases my own sensibility, I pursue it. Now, sometimes it works, and sometimes it's disastrously, because I have a very limited sensibility, and fortunately, nobody else around the world has the same sensibility as I have. But the important thing for me was to carry the audience into a film that would show them a Ken Loach film that would be seen by the people inside the story. One of the tragedy of British cinema attendance is, first of all, not enough people go to see Ken Loach films. If you want to see a Ken Loach film, you have to go to Paris, because after one weekend, it's off the theaters in England. And secondly, that the people who Ken Loach talks about don't go see his films. And one of my main fundamental aim when I was figuring out this film was, how do I get the people who are the subjects of a Ken Loach film to go see a Ken Loach film? And I thought that the stripping story might help them bring them there. And that obviously worked, because we know it worked. But whether the comedy would have worked, we had no idea. I had no experience of comedy, and I did try it a few other times, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So my sensibility with comedies, as we know, comedy is by far the most difficult genre to achieve success with, and to get it right. And we just got lucky. Absolutely. It was meant to be. It was really an excuse for the story to move along. I mean, obviously the main emotional through line of the story is the relationship between the father, the unemployed father, and the kid, and his ability to stay in contact with the kid. And we have similar emotional, personal dramas at different levels of intensity or presence in the film in the other characters. And the stripping is the engine, but is not the theme of the film. It's not the subject of the film. The one thing that we decided very early on was we were not going to see anybody strip, in fact, because I wasn't particularly interested in that. And to be honest, the first couple of drafts of the script ended without the strip. They ended with us moving outside of the hall, the working men's club where the strip takes place, and witnessing the reality of the world as it still is. And it was David Orkin at Film 4 that said, you cannot keep an audience waiting for a strip for 90 minutes and then not give them the strip at the end. And it was him, and rightly so, who overruled me effectively and said, you have to do that. Then unfortunately he wasn't able to finance the movie, but nonetheless it was his contribution that definitely said you have to get them to strip at the end. And the other obviously important thing was to get a group of people who We're not obviously handsome, we're not obviously attractive, we're not obviously the kind of people who do this job normally. That was fundamental to the central idea, but also to the fact that the film comes from a real world, and the real builder, real steel worker, unemployed steel worker, etc., does not necessarily have a Chip and Dale's body. Funny enough, one of the things that happened while we were developing the project, while we were just about to go to start filming, was we got a note from a production company, Andy Harris's production company, was saying, wait a minute, you're doing a movie that I've already done, that I am making. And I said, I don't know what you're making. And he had, in fact, made a film for, I think, ITV. I can't remember if it was ITV or the BBC. I suspect it was ITV because his relationships were with Granada. And that was a group of unemployed, actually miners, who stripped. And the interesting thing there that was, well, first of all, the issue disappeared immediately when it turned out that we had started developing our project long before he had started developing his, so he didn't pursue the story. But the first 5 minutes of his film was a group of very handsome, athletic, attractive steel miners taking their clothes off. By the 7th minute of his movie, they had stripped. So the movie had nowhere to go. Plus, the subjects were not real. And we did exactly the opposite. We made sure that the people were as real as possible and obviously didn't take their clothes off until as late as possible.